I think that Trump, over the last 6 or 9 months, has come to rather like using the military instrument. He bombed Iran 9 months ago with no loss of American life. He took out Maduro in Venezuela. I think he's coming to feel that being the military strongman, is rather good. Which is dangerous because this time round, it's entirely possible that the Iranians will succeed in hitting an American ship, an American aircraft, American bases.
Now, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is chairing or has chaired an emergency Cobra meeting to decide how the UK will respond to the joint US-Israel strikes on Iran and subsequent retaliation on US bases in the Middle East. President Trump has said that the administration's major combat operations on Iran have begun and are arguing that the terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. A UK government spokesman has said earlier this morning, Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and that is why we have continually supported efforts to reach a negotiated solution. We do not want to see further escalation into a wider regional conflict. Well, let's welcome to the show Lord Ricketts, Peter Ricketts, former National Security Advisor. Lord Ricketts, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon.
Hello, Alexis.
The Iranian Foreign Ministry has said that the strikes were wholly unprovoked, illegal and illegitimate. What do you make of these strikes?
Well, I think as far as the UK interprets international law, there wasn't a legal base for that in the sense that Iran was not posing an imminent threat to the US or the UK. In fact, Iran was as weak as it has been for years after the American-Israeli strikes on their nuclear facilities, on the smashing of their regional proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. So this is a war of choice by the US and Israel. They seem to be seeking a sort of regime change initiative in Iran. I'm not at all clear how that's going to happen. There isn't an alternative regime waiting in the wings to take over. It's more likely to lead to some kind of regime collapse and chaos, and who knows what will emerge from that. But right now, it's a very dangerous time. Iran promised that they would retaliate across the region if there were strikes. They are doing that more quickly than they did last June and seeming more intensively as well. So we're in a dangerous escalatory spiral now, and I suspect we're in for several days of these strikes and Iranian responses.
So would you say under the UK interpretation of international law, this attack was illegal?
I would say that, yes. I don't see the case that Iran was presenting the kind of threat to Israel and the US which would allow them to go for what is an all-out strike designed to topple the Iranian regime. We've had for 80 years in the UN Charter rules about how countries can deal with each other, and the use of force to take out a regime is illegal except under very special circumstances. So, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think, therefore, the UK was involved in this. I don't think the US were using UK bases for their strike. Of course, the UK now has to protect our own citizens, our own assets around the Middle East. I'm sure the government are very focused on that at the moment and trying to get the fighting over as soon as possible back to negotiations. After all, negotiations were going on until 2 days ago, precisely aiming to cap the Iranian nuclear program.
Lord Ricketts, what would happen if the UK is asked to play a part in this attack? Given what you told us about the interpretation in international law, what happens if the Americans say we could do with some help here?
Well, I don't think the UK will agree to strike Iran. I think where the UK can help is in defending our allies and friendly regimes in the Middle East. So if they're asking for air defense support for Gulf states, for example, or countries like Cyprus or Lebanon, then I'm sure the UK would be wanting to try and do that if we've got the right kind of capabilities in the region. I'm not sure how much we have, but I think in terms of joining the strikes on Iran, no, I don't think that the government would be willing to do that.
Why do you think these strikes have gone ahead? We know that there have been lots of negotiations. We know that partners, allies of the US all across the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, were urging for these strikes not to go ahead. Why do you think the American president has ignored those pleas and gone ahead with the strikes anyway?
It seemed to me that he was in two minds on that up until very recently, and there were negotiations going on in Oman until a couple of days ago. My guess, we can't know for sure, is that Netanyahu in Israel decided to force America's hand. Trump had produced this enormous buildup of military forces in the region. That has a momentum of its own, and it was becoming more and more difficult for Trump to wind down the military threat without some massive concession from Iran. I think Netanyahu decided he'd go for it, knowing that really Trump would have no alternative but to go in with Israel, given the forces that they had. And, there's also a sense, I think, that Trump over the last 6 or 9 months has come to rather like using the military instrument. He bombed Iran 9 months ago with no loss of American life. He took out Maduro in Venezuela. I think he's coming to feel that being the military strongman, is rather good. Which is dangerous because this time round, it's entirely possible that the Iranians will succeed in hitting an American ship, an American aircraft, American bases. Some reports already they've struck an base in Bahrain. So he may be about to learn that brandishing America's enormous military potential is not risk-free, and there can be significant damage as a result.
Lord Ricketts, do you think he's potentially made it worse? The previous attack we saw in Iran was a specific attack aimed at destroying the nuclear program. Now, there are arguments whether or not it was totally obliterated, as we were told from the White House, or not. But in that video, that several minutes of video that Donald Trump posted on his social media site, he explicitly said these attacks are to promote or have the end result of regime change. Now, that could, of course, mean that the Iranian government have nothing to lose right now and will go all out retaliatory attacks. So, in a sense, could have made the whole engagement a lot more dangerous for the region.
I agree. I mean, it's always dangerous to use military force without a very clear and achievable political objective. Because at the end of the day, the point of using military force is a political objective of some kind. At least last June, it was clear he was attacking the nuclear sites. Of course, now he's saying that they need to go back in to attack the nuclear program again. So it clearly wasn't obliterated, but he's added the threat from ballistic missiles. And as you say, he's inviting Iranian citizens to rise up and take power. I mean, that is, frankly, in my view, pretty irresponsible because the Americans are in no place to protect Iranian protesters on the streets. You can't, by aerial bombardment, stop security forces being brutal and thuggish in the way that they were 6 or 8 weeks ago. So I think that the idea that you can somehow interfere and produce a regime change that leads to a new set of leadership, pro-Western, pro-human rights, pro-democracy, although we'd all love to see that, you can't do that by airstrikes. You have to have at the least ground forces. Even then, as we found in Iraq, that can go badly wrong as well. So in my view, the aim of regime change is not achievable by Israel and the US striking their leadership targets. I mean, if they kill the senior leadership this time round, what will emerge? Probably some sort of military strongmen, Revolutionary Guard-led organization. And we've seen the security forces still seem to be loyal to the regime. So I don't think that that is possible. The only thing that I think is possible is to kind of get Iran back to the negotiating table, chastened, weakened by military strikes, and willing perhaps to settle for a broader deal than they were. But even that, I think, is uncertain.
And just finally, Lord Ricketts, we've seen reaction from Russia. They're pretty displeased at this attack. They're saying that actually negotiations should have continued. We haven't heard from China as yet since we went on air. Do you think China has a part to play here?
Yeah, I mean, the Russians, of course, have been getting a lot of weapons from Iran. So this is not good news at all for the Russians. The Chinese typically stay right out of these kind of events. They don't want to get involved. They want to try and stay on good terms with all sides. And I think in a way, if America becomes bogged down in another Middle Eastern war, the Chinese don't see that as too much of a problem. It allows the Chinese to go around the world saying they're the peacemakers while Americans are the warmongers. So I don't think there'll be any active Chinese engagement. What they will be watching, I'm sure, is any risk of blocking of the Hormuz Straits, where so much of the world's oil and gas comes out. I think a threat to the oil supplies to all countries, including China, would certainly get their attention. But right now, I suspect they'll sit back and watch and in a way, rather hope that America gets bogged down in this war that they've chosen to start.
Lord Ricketts, thank you as ever for your time. Really good to speak to you.
Thank you.
Lord Ricketts there, former National Security Advisor.